ever watched like America's Funniest Videos or the home videos, which show people doing crazy things? And a lot of times we laugh at them, and some of them I cringe at. And they start showing it, and I say, don't do that. You're not going there. Have you ever seen people trying to balance on something? You know, the kids that are sliding, they get on their skateboards and they're jumping up and they're going down steps and the rail. And you know that's not going to end well, right? You already know it. You go, oh, this guy's going to get hurt. And I see some, but it's bad enough. Listen, take some advice. I'm being a pastor and a pester here. Take some advice. You know, once you get older, do not try those things anymore. You're supposed to be wiser. You're supposed to have it down. But they do the craziest thing. All of a sudden you see some guy try the skateboard act. Or a kid is able to jump. They jump off roofs and they're trying to land in pools. It just doesn't work sometimes. And so, but the balance, they're trying to balance on some things. And some of you that went with us to Zion National Park, this is one place, I know it. I can stand on this edge and be very comfortable. I don't know if you notice how agile I am, but I have both feet. I'm hanging 10 right now, you know. And I can put my heels off. Look at this. But you have, it was impressive, huh? If you have a 2,000-foot fall there, I think I was with you, Ron. We were standing at the edge, and we were standing there, and you're looking over the edge. Now, you know, you kind of go like this, and you look down, and there was a 2,000-foot drop. Right, Ron? And Oscar ought to know that. He was about crawling down the hill. Remember that, Sarah? He made it to the top. I don't remember who helped him, but I'm telling you, when Oscar came down, remember, Sarah, he saw you and he says, honey, I'm never leaving you again. And so, but you know, you can do it like this. It's real easy. I can dangle my foot over there and my arm and that, but put a 2,000-foot drop and it changes things. And there's just some things you don't try to balance. But there is a balancing act that we have spiritually, and a lot of these things are in our life, and they're so important. And it's something, dads, we have to realize too, that we're balancing things in our life, and we're balancing things with our family. One of the things we balance is time. Let me just throw some things out there. We balance. And dads, if we don't balance that time correctly, then we can shortchange something. Have you ever done that? You know, an example would be putting too much time into work and other activities and not time with your family. So it's something we got to catch. We got to watch. And you're always going to have periods of time where you're busy and you're going to have to do some things, and so that's understood. But I'm telling you, in general, in your life, be careful how you're balancing time and family. You know, one way we do it, and you know there's people, and I don't know if we have any here, and let's not point fingers, but there's some people that are workaholics, right? Come on, we can talk. Thank you, George. Thank you, Tanya. Tanya, I noticed you did your hair again. It definitely is pink now. We used to call her Pinky. Now I'm not sure. She has a couple streaks of blonde in there. We might go back to Blondie because you've changed completely pink here. So, but listen, you want to balance your life out. Too much work, no play makes Jack a dull boy. Makes you a bad dad too. You know, your children need you. They need that time and that. And so we have to watch that. Other areas that we have to be careful in our balance, and we're going to go through this a couple times this morning, but like discipline, having enough discipline, but having enough love. And if you don't have both together and have it balanced in your life, then the children feel like they're unloved or feel like dad's just a beast. You know, and we don't want that. Matter of fact, there's some churches that err in it the way they teach discipline, and they go so far on discipline in judgment that people will feel then. The kids grow up and rebel later in life against the Lord. And it's kind of like, if that's Christianity, I don't want it. You know what I'm talking about? We noticed as we went, when we had our Christian school, we'd go to seminars and that with the kids and competition with the kids. And we noticed some of the churches that were known to be the strict and the best are strict, and they're really strong in that areas and that, and they preached it and they lived it and they taught their parents. And I can remember here preaching, said, well, if you get a spanking at school, when you get home, you're going to get one from me too. You ever hear that one? And I think they got it a lot. But those kids, my wife and I noticed something. They were actually the worst children at the seminars or at the competition, because behind the backs of their leaders, they did whatever they wanted to. They were already rebelling. You understand what I'm saying? If you don't watch it and you focus too much on discipline and you focus too much on correction, there will develop a problem. Now, we have it in all of life, and I throw some of these things out just to keep you focused that you need to apply this principle. And we're going to jump into some spiritual text here in a minute, but just imagine if somebody isn't balanced in their finances. Does that cause a problem? Okay, so you can spend too much and not have money for bills, right? You know people that do that? We've probably all done it at some time. And you're going to get a little bit unbalanced there, but you could do that. You could save so much, dads, you drive your wife and children crazy because you don't do anything. Just always saving it. Have you known people like that? Yeah. So the key is balance. And I'm going to jump just to a text, and you should know this text if you read the Bible. It's Ecclesiastes chapter 3. And he's telling us this, and spiritually, chapter 1, he says, you know, I tried to find more meaning to life, and I looked at wisdom. And he does this a couple times in Ecclesiastes, but especially chapter 1. And I became the wisest, I'm going to say wise guy. Yeah, I became the wisest guy around. But I found out that was vanity. And then I looked, and I was searching for something more in pleasure. So I tried to find it, so I went to pleasure. And I had all my lakes, and I had all my horses, and I had all my fields, and all my fruit trees, and all that. And you know what I found out? That was vanity too. And then he goes to chapter 3, and follow the progression here. He says, I found out, that there's a time and place for everything. Time to give birth and a time to die. A time to love and a time to refrain from love. A time to pick up rocks and a time to throw them. You know, so sometimes we get focused on the throwing of the rock, right? And we need to keep balance in our life. So if you look at that, he concludes his thought in the end of the book, and he says, remember to keep the ordinance of God. Remember to follow God, because this is where you're going to be fulfilled in life. Right. But you're going to have all these things happening in your life, and it's pretty clear you're going to have to have balance. So you're going to need them you're going to need it in your finances. You're going to need it with your time. You're going to need it with your work. You're going to need it in the way you discipline your children, dads and moms. And you're going to need it in your health. There's a tragedy. Mary and I watched this tape, and it just showed how bad our health is today because we don't eat right and because we don't exercise. You know, the biggest muscle I had was causing me trouble. I went to the doctor several years ago, and my back was hurting. And he says, you know what your problem is? He was rude. He said, this is too big. Yeah. Your coal car gets too big. Your caboose gets too big. And the two just don't work together. You know what I'm talking about? And so he says that's causing you too much. That's causing some of your back problems. And so, he might have been rude, but he was being honest. Listen, check out our health. And sometimes we're our own worst enemies, and there's balance in this. And you need to look at that, take care of yourself, because as time goes on, we have more of those we call them genetic defects. They might not be so genetic. They might be our habits that we've had and that we've caused problems. Now, why am I bringing all this up? If I'm bringing it up because of our health, partly, yeah, I want to see everybody healthy. I get calls, and I remember warning people, well, you better take care of this, and they didn't take care of it, and then they had their heart attack or they had their stroke. We have somebody down right now with a stroke that'll never get back up, but they were warned, and they could have solved it. So that's partly it, and partly for our finances yet. I see people get into trouble in that. But let me tell you the real reason now why I'm sharing this. Years ago when I was a youth pastor in another church, and I'm going to give you several examples right now and see how important this is. A woman was constantly in trouble with her finances. Now, she had a job. She was single now, but she constantly had problems with her rent and not being able to make it with her bills. And, we're thinking, what is going on? She should be able to make it. So looking into that to give advice, this is what she was doing wrong. Pastor would get up and explain a need in the church, and we need money. She would give her entire paycheck, the whole thing. And then she wouldn't have money for food, and she wouldn't have money for bills. She couldn't pay her rent. And so the church had been helping her do that. And she was out of balance there. You'd say that's not even wise. See, so you can, somebody says you can't outgive God. And I think that statement might be true a little bit, but you can give too much. And in her case, I think practically everybody in this room, I even heard some people gasp and shake their heads. No, yeah, it was happening. And it went on for a long time. And then we finally found out, and so we had to tell somebody, don't give so much. You got to take care of your bills. It's a responsibility. So there, you have to be in balance. And I've already said one of them where churches had taught so much to be strict, so much to raise your children with spanking, so much of discipline, so much of judgment, that actually it turned opposite. It drove their children away. That when they were not being seen, around the adults, they were terrible. And then when they grew up, they were the worst ones at the seminars or at the competition that we were at. And so that became a problem. You have to have balance. You have to have balance with work and play. And I've seen this with Christians now, and so I'm bringing this up as Christians because in recovery, when people stop taking drugs or they stop drinking and they try to change their lifestyle, they have a void. And the void, they got out of balance because now Friday and Saturday nights, when they used to party and do that, now what do? Listen, you don't want to stay home. You're young, and you don't want to stay home and watch TV and do nothing in that. And so they needed something to fill their lives. And basically, they might have made it for 6 months or a year, and I heard others made it even longer. But you know what happens? Is that void doesn't get filled, and so it starts to get filled with something else, or they go right back to it. Okay? You see the wisdom in that? It has to be filled with something. That's why youth groups and recovery groups need to have something, that they're doing something, because they have lost that, and it has become a void in their life, and they needed to get it taken care of. Can you have, this is a trick question, so don't answer. Can you have too much faith? I said don't answer. Can you get overbalanced in faith? George, that was the right answer. Yeah, we're going to look at our first text. And I bring this up to you, and I remind you something. When when the noun form of faith is used, faith, believe, and trust is all the same word. We just translate it different because it seems to work out better in English. But it's the word pistis. Now, if you use the word, the verb form, which, guess what? That changes faith to action because a verb is an action word. So faith is supposed to take action. So when you look at, of course, Hebrews 11 and the famous faith chapter, it talks about the action of faith. So that would be pisteuo, and your faith is supposed to take action. So let's look at this. We're going to only look at a couple verses because I didn't want to go too long on Father's Day, but just verses 15 to 17. And 14 is always a great verse to look at too with it, but so you can look at it afterwards. If a brother or sister without clothing and need of daily food, and one of you says to them, go in peace, be warmed and be filled, and yet you do not give them what is necessary for their body, what use is that? Even so, if it has no works, even so faith, if it has no works, is dead, being by itself. So faith has to be in balance with works. You could say you have faith, and he's going to say in another verse, he says, I'll show you my faith by my works. You see my life, and you're going to see Jesus. You see my life, and you're going to see my faith. But too many times, we might just put a hand on a shoulder and pray for them and do nothing about the need in their life. This text is telling you, take an action step. This text is telling you, make faith an active part of your life and not just some fundamental belief that you're carrying between your ears. Really, I mean, think about it. Do something about it. Let it be seen. See, if you look at the life of Jesus, and I've said this many times, everywhere Jesus went, things got better. And really, if you look in the history of true Christianity, where true Christianity went, things got better. It's the problem is we get whacked sometimes. And I can honestly see why atheists and agnostics and liberals and that don't like religion. And really, we shouldn't like religion anyway, because that's man's attempt to reach out to God. And really, Christianity is God reaching out to us and us responding positively to it. But you can understand when you hear of all the whack things Christians have done, the problem is there, and that's why it turns people away. We need to be just the opposite, and we need to be the ones then that are drawing people to Christ. And that, Father's Day message is the dads, we should be leading in that. We need to be leading in that in our homes, the way we deal with our families, and the way we deal with our children. I had a situation where, and I have this many times, listen, I heard this lady speaking this week, and I just wish I had a tape of that. Sometimes, I don't know if you ever do that, but you see it on, and it said, man, I wish I had a tape of that, just that little blurb. But she was talking about something I talk to my kids about and people about all the time. And she just said it so well, and basically this is it. We have an entitlement society today. Kids are growing up, people are growing up and believe they're entitled. They're looking at my rights. This is what I should be getting. And I'm entitled to this. Society's supposed to help me out. They're supposed to pay for all my college and all of that. Well, obviously I have a different idea with that. They have responsibility too. And with adulthood comes responsibility. It means you're supposed to do something. You're responsible for your own life more than anybody else is. Lady said something very good. And she just said, you need to realize that having a job, having a good job, and working at it hard is what's going to get you ahead in life. Now, we know Christ is involved in this, and so I'm not saying that. I'm just saying what the lady said. And she's so right. If you're going out there and you don't get a job, and you don't work hard, and you don't save, and you don't balance this part of your life out, it's going to be a problem. Let me give you an example. It says, we're not careful as Christians, and I hear some, what I would say, phony Christians get on the news and say some things sometimes, and they get a following, but they're wrong. Okay? They're just wrong. We can do things and say things that sound really spiritual, but it's not. So, should we help people? And the answer is yeah. But do we have to help everybody? The answer is no. I think everybody in here knows when somebody's hurt or somebody's sick or somebody needs help, we should be there. But sometimes people are in trouble because they got themselves there and they had plenty and they weren't wise with what they had and they didn't do what God wanted them to do. So I'll ask you guys to judge on this situation. So I had this person and they needed a job, but they didn't get a job. And they just went on and on and on. I don't know how they make it. I partly know how people help them, right? Mom and dad gives to them, and I know that was a big thing with this young man. And they just keep going on and on. And so he told me this. He said, you know what, I've made a commitment. This true story. I was in his car when he told me this. We were driving. And he said, I've really started praying about God to give me a job. That sounds really good, doesn't it? Right. Come on, you can join in. Thank you, George. Thank you, Pinky. Or Blondie. I'm going back to Blondie. You said just a couple little strands of pink. Now you have a couple strands of blonde, so it's Blondie now. But that sounds really good and really spiritual. And people will say this in a lot of ways. They say, I'm praying. That doesn't mean so much sometimes. Then as we talked, I found out he just had faith that God was going to give him a job. Now, does that sound good? Come on, it sounds good, doesn't it? Come on. I'm baiting you right now. You know, the trap, I'm about ready to set the hook. Because then he told me a little bit later in our conversation, he wasn't putting in any applications to get a job. He wasn't really looking for a job. He was just praying about it and believing out of his mouth, came, and I'm just believing God is going to give me one if he wants me to have one. Now, what do we think about that? Is that the proper use of prayer? The answer is no. Ask, seek, and knock, Jesus said. Luke chapter 11. So he wasn't using prayer right, and he wasn't using faith right. I've seen so many times we mess this thing up with faith. God told the children of Israel they'd be victorious. But they still had to go to war. And matter of fact, as I was meditating on this week in one of my texts that I was studying, not only did they go to war, God wanted them to be smart in the way they went to war. He says, I want you to do this. I want you to set a little trap for them. You do this and have them come out after you and they're fighting here, and then I want you to set the ambush comes in the town and destroy it. So there's some wisdom in this and that. But faith takes action, and that's where we mess up. We get out of balance. We can say, I have faith. But we get out of balance with this faith thing. And so it becomes an issue, just like this guy did. He said, that isn't very good. That he's not putting in applications for a job, right? So he should have done that. And so he was just kind of got out of balance, maladjusted truth or whatever. Let's take a look at another area. Ecclesiastes 7:16 and 17. Very important text actually in Ecclesiastes. Ecclesiastes is one of my favorite books of the Bible. I have 66 favorite books of the Bible. And this is one of my favorites. Do not be excessively righteous and do not be overly wise. Balance, my friend. Why should you ruin yourself? Verse 17. Do not be excessively wicked and do not be a fool. Why should you die before your time? So go back to 16. Basically, he's saying here, stay in balance. And listen, some people get so heavenly minded, they're no earthly good. Now, most of the time we talk about it and we look at some people get so earthly minded, they're no heavenly good. So you have to keep this in balance. But there's a warning here for us as believers in Christ. And that is if we get too righteous minded and focus on that too much, we can just ruin our relationships. And we ruin our relationship with our children that. And I've seen parents do that. And it's kind of, I never correct a parent like in a situation like that. But I see it and I kind of gasp. That they are getting too righteous minded. And they're just hurting the situation. So we need to really be careful in that. There are some churches that have erred completely in this, and so there's balance. Remember, I'm talking to you about balance. You can get on the edge, and you can be okay, but you get too close to the edge, you fall over, right? And if you emphasize something too much, you get out of balance. And so you got to pull back, and you got to pray about this. And wisdom, it says, wisdom becomes the issue. And you just figure it out and say, you don't have to be told everything about it to say, well, common sense says you just don't do that. You just don't tempt God in some of these things. There's a denomination, we won't mention the denomination, but you should know it probably, that believes there is no hell. Now, does the Bible talk about hell? Absolutely. Does the Bible talk about eternal life and eternal suffering and eternal punishment? Yes, over and over. And so it's there over and over. So there is this very clear teaching, and yet there's a denomination that believes this, that there is no hell because God is love. Okay? Now, they push love to the extreme, that there could be no punishment in that. But listen, love has its boundaries. Love has to be strong enough to say no to things sometimes. And love has its boundaries, and if it doesn't, then evil and oppression comes from the lack of true balanced love. Concupiscence is a word that, it's over emphasis on the wrong then. Over, getting involved with evil, getting involved with sinful thing. It's lasciviousness. It's you've gone whacked on this thing. And I'm sorry about the word whacked, but that's what's happening. And so God, in His love, balances this, and this is what the protection for us, because if you're not balanced in love and understanding that evil and oppression will prevail. In other words, people take advantage when you don't have discipline. And so God, in His love for us, what He does is He punishes evil, which frees us from the slavery to sin and the slavery to oppression in our life. You might have to meditate on that to grasp that. But that's why there's love. And so look at this, what God says at Proverbs 13. And maybe I got too deep on that for you, but look at this. He who withholds his rod hates his son, but he who loves him disciplines him diligently. Now, that seems like you crossed your, wires here. But not so. Parents, if you really love your children, you're going to say no to them, but it's hard sometimes to say no. And it's actually love and the desire for them to grow right, to love them more than loving that moment where you get a little peace and you don't hear the crying because you said no. Right? It's tougher. It's tougher to say no. It's tougher to discipline than it is just to let them go and do their whole thing. Right? If you're a parent, you know that. You've had to cross that line of decision, I'm going to discipline, And you do so for their welfare. Because, you see, if we don't, then we become a slave to sin and evil and oppression rule. So you have to say no. And you have to set boundaries. Because believe me, they will have them at work. Believe me, they have them on the streets when you drive. You're supposed to have a license. You know, you're supposed to drive the speed limit. You know, you're supposed to stop at a stop sign and red lights. So everywhere we go, sports, business, society, all has rules. You violate those rules, there's a penalty. And they, if we don't teach them that, they're going to grow up not getting that. Now, I want to kind of conclude with a couple little things here, if I can, and take maybe a little bit of time. But you have to balance forgiveness and punishment. You have to balance grace and judgment. You have to balance mercy and penalizing. Now, these are all words used that have similar meanings, but they are different. Grace, sometimes you say, well, we're not going to give them because they don't deserve it, but that's exactly what grace is. Grace is giving something to someone that they don't deserve. And so there's a balance of that. And there's a balance of love and what we already said, discipline in love and being strict and saying no at times. Now, I bring this up because in order to stay in balance, let me say a thing. You know with God, He has forgiven you and you didn't deserve it. Right? You know He loved us, but God demonstrates His love toward us, and while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. Romans 5:8. So God has demonstrated His love to you, not only biblically and not only with Jesus Christ, but you know acts in your life, God has been there for you. And sometimes, once again, not only did you not deserve it, and you didn't deserve mercy, because that's what mercy is kind of not getting what you do deserve. Mercy, Elias means actually to have somebody have pity on you. And God has pitied you even though, once again, you didn't deserve it. If there's anything, and I just want to caution you because I don't think I gave you this verse, but you know it well. John 13:35. By this shall all men know that you are my disciples if you have love for one another. Right? Everybody knows that, right? Now let's go off that. Listen, the world is going to know us more by grace, more by forgiveness, more by mercy, and more by love than they will by our judgment, our penalties, our discipline, and our fighting. Okay, do I have you? Yes. I want to know I have you because I've lost you in the whole message if I don't have you at this point. By this shall all men know that you are my disciples if you have love one to another. I want you to follow this because the world will know us and Christ more by that act of love, grace, mercy, forgiveness than they will by us being tough guy. And by us having standards. Do we need standards? Yes, they need to be in balance. So if I'm saying this to lead up to this, if anything, we need those 4 items. And if we're going to err, listen to me, if we're going to err, E-R-R-O-R, if we're going to err, we err in love. And we err in forgiveness. And we err in mercy. We err in grace. So if you're trying to weigh it out and say, what do I do? Make sure you've shown love. Now, the world sometimes is going to see that as weakness. And sometimes, yes, you will be taken advantage of. Business deals, family, relationships, children, they will see that as weakness, and sometimes you will be taken advantage of and you'll be criticized. But I would rather be criticized for loving too much and giving grace and giving forgiveness and being merciful and being helpful than I would be for being a tightwad and hard and disciplined person. Amen. Right? Because that's how they will know us. I want to end with this one text. I go to Proverbs chapter 30 and say, here it explains that one of the greatest problems in biblical history and Israel's history and our country today. Keep deception and lies far from me. Give me neither poverty nor riches. Feed me with the food that is my portion. That I not be full and deny you and say, who is the Lord? Or that I not be in want and steal and profane the name of my God. Do you see the balance there? I hope you can after pointing this out. I don't want to have too much, so I act like I don't even need God. Who's He? I don't need to pray anymore for money. I don't need to pray for, everything because, man, I'm living large. And on the other hand, I don't want to be so poor that I have nothing, and so everything I look around and I see, I need to grab it to have me make it. See, he's balancing that too. Now the two extremes, and then I want to close with this thought, and I'm trying to get you to think through this because this is important. The two extremes in life on balance and all these things is here in this topic is this. Is that we have a tendency to fall when things are bad, right? We have a tendency to doubt God, and we have a tendency to struggle with that. When we don't have enough, when things didn't go our way, when things didn't work out, we struggle there, right? But we don't recognize this. That biblically, and I really believe this historically, and what's happening in our country today, because we have so much, we don't think we need God. Mentally, we do. Mentally, we know it's there. Do you believe? Everybody nod their head. Yep. But because we have so much, we have lost our dependency on God. And it's a real problem. Matter of fact, the greatest, you go back and when everything started going good, Judges is a great book for this, the book of Judges. When you go through it, you see when everything was going great is when they fell again. And when everything went bad, they finally turned to God and God delivered them. They cried out, God, we're sorry, repent. Then God listened, sent them a deliverer. They responded. They did right. They recovered. Their nation grew again, and ba-bam, they fell again. That is the cycle over and over repeating itself throughout biblical history. And it's repeating itself today. Now, I mentioned a couple weeks ago a message I thought was just so important, and it had to deal with everyone's on a path. And God has you on this path, and you're to be following the path that God has you on. There's many paths we follow, but where do your path that you're going lead you? Every path has a destination. And we know that, and I see that. You have a destination with the way you're treating your finances. You have a destination with health, with the way you eat and the way you exercise and how you're taking care of yourself. You have all these destinations, all these paths that you're going down. But I said this, and I want to close with this now. We're done. We ignore the signs. We ignore them. Because God gives us signs along the way. Biblically, it talks about that. God gives a little warning shot. He sent a prophet. There was a message. There was, we couldn't pay our bill. That's a warning. That's a sign. But we ignore them. I gave you several things that we ignore. And I want to give you a couple more this morning because I think these are really important. It'd be a sign. It's a sign you're going down the freeway and the speed limit is posted 65. How many here have gone faster than 65? Probably everyone, right? Okay, I just want to have a little fun. How many have gone faster than 70? Oh yeah, oh yeah. Actually, I think it grew in numbers. How many have hit the 80 mark and 85? Yeah, there it goes. And your son is a police officer. Yeah. And so we do. You know, we're driving down the road, and we're coming up to it, and it says 35 miles of speed limit around the curve. Can you take it at 40? Oh, baby, yeah. Yeah, it can almost be a challenge, right? I mean, I've had my RV, and I've been towing my boat, and it said 40 or 35. Man, I was going around at 45 just fine, you know. And so we ignore. The point is we ignore those signs, and sometimes because of it, we're headed for trouble. Just because you make it one time, you know, the worst thing for an alcoholic is to go and have that, and he's recovered and he's doing good, and then somebody offers him one beer, and he gets away with one, and the next time he says, you know, I can handle one. And he does it again, he handles one, but then next time it's 2 or 3, and then he's gone again, right? We ignore the signs. And we know we're on a path, and we know where we're supposed to be going. On this area of balance, my friend, keep your life in balance. Spiritually, faith and works are balanced out. True faith and true prayer doesn't mean that God does everything and that faith does everything. You still have an active part. They prayed and they believed God, but God said, you're still going to war. And I just throw this in. Obviously, some men died in the war. And they said, well, how's that a victory? It was because their nation survived. And sometimes we don't put this together in the wisdom of it and that, but the challenge, my friend, is that I've seen Christians give all their money and they shouldn't have. I've seen Christians get unbalanced in a doctrine, so much in love that they never punished and they never did anything. I've seen them get so out of balance in their lives with how they judged or how they disciplined and how they said, well, I'm practicing that. And it looks spiritual. It sounds really good sometimes, but you start seeing that they overextended themselves in that. So look at your lives, look at your paths, look at the balance. And dads, what a perfect thing for us to look at the way we spend time with our families, where we're spending it, how we're spending it, because it's all part of balance. And you keep it balanced, you're going to do fine. Let's pray.